One rule I thought was unfair at school was not being allowed to go to the toilet during a lesson, because it's something that we don't really have a whole ton of control over, and it felt like the teachers wanted us all to publicly humiliate ourselves if we couldn't hold it anymore.
One rule I thought was unfair at school was the way they policed hairstyles. So some people were made to tie back their long hair, other people were sent into in-school isolation for hairstyles that were considered inappropriate by the school. The main reason I thought this was unfair is that it seems arbitrary. There's no educational reason why people can't have different hairstyles, and the isolation itself was affecting people's learning more than the hairstyles themselves.
I didn't really find the rules at the schools I went to be unfair. However, I do know that some schools will ban certain hairstyles that are important for certain cultures and the upkeep of curly hair, and that I do find unfair.
The rule that I thought was unfair at school was one in relation to carrying a bag. Now, the school I was at was one where there was all different ages, and there was one rule that if you're inside in the corridors, you weren't allowed to carry your bag on your shoulder. And the majority of us tried to do that, and we'd either get shouted at by teachers or we'd end up hitting someone in the face. So now actually, I can see why it was a suitable rule.
Hello and welcome. If you're new, we're so glad that you've joined us. And if you've been here before, welcome back at a whole nother week of Encounter. We are the Christian Union and my name is Rad. You might have seen me last week on Tuesday, but if you haven't, hello. I'll share a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Bulgaria and I study biomedical science at Surrey University.
Yes, and hello, I would like to extend my welcome as well. Welcome to Encounter 2021. You probably haven't seen me before, but I'm David, and I am studying law with criminology here at University of Surrey. I'm from Hong Kong, also lived in Thailand, but that's a little bit about me, but I'm also going to be your host tonight. But just to let you guys know some logistical things about tonight, because of Zoom webinar, which is something we're using right now, we can't really see or hear you, but you can, if you really need, use the chat function to let us know if you have any big questions or anything like that if you need. Also, big welcome to everyone who's watching on YouTube, because this is live on YouTube as well, so welcome. But just a little bit of a run through tonight. We're going to have an interview with Eric, who's joining us from the US, who's going to talk a little bit about his experience with the topic that we're going to be talking about tonight. And then we're going to dive into a little talk by Robin, who's going to be talking about the topic of justice. And tonight's question is whether or not Christianity is as unfair as it looks.
So after Robin's talk, we will have an informal Zoom as an opportunity for to get to know you, to ask any questions that you might have about Christianity and Jesus. And if you really need to talk to someone throughout this entire event, there will be someone right there now that you can talk to. This is the link I'll post in the chat.
On that note, let's start by introducing Robin, who's our speaker for tonight. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome.
We'd love to know a little bit more about you. Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. So my name's Robin. I live in Wimbledon and I am married. I've got 3 wives and 1 kid. No, 1 kid and 3 wives. No, 1 wife and 3 kids. Got to get that right. And a dog and 2 guinea pigs. What do I do? Well, I've been trying to kind of mix it up a bit in terms of like how I describe what I do. So tonight I'm going to tell you that I'm a shepherd, because I am a shepherd. The Bible says that that's the job of pastors. I'm a pastor of a church and pastors are shepherds. And the Bible describes us as like sheep, which might sound like really cute and cuddly. Actually, it's not very complimentary to be called a sheep because they're not very clever and they kind of drift off and go in different places. And so my job as a shepherd is to feed the sheep and to help go looking for those that have gone astray or those that are lost. And I do that by being a vicar of a Church of England church here in Wimbledon. And I'm a sheep as well as a shepherd. So I don't sort of think that I'm any better than the sheep, but I help the sheep by pointing them to the Good Shepherd, who is Jesus Christ. So that was a kind of convoluted way of saying I work at a church called Emmanuel Church here in Wimbledon. I've been here about 8 years. Before that, I was pastoring a church in Delhi in India. I speak Hindi a little bit. So there's a bit about me.
I was really looking forward to see how you're going to introduce yourself, because I know you've been doing that for a lot of nights already. But good analogy.
I'm running out of ways to describe myself. But yeah. I think I've got two more. I will try and think two more.
Yeah. On that note, we'll see you in a bit for your talk. So see you in a bit.
See ya.
Tonight, we also have another guest here, Eric. Hello, hello. We're just going to introduce you as well and talk to you, actually have a chat with you.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
It's good to see you.
Good to be seen.
Glad you're here. Can you tell us who you are, what you do, where you're joining from, actually? That's the first question.
Yes, I'm joining from San Diego, California. And who am I? I'm Eric Lige, and I'm a music maker. I'm the creator of a global music recording collaborative called the Ethnos Project. It's a series of music albums featuring musicians and songwriters and engineers from all around the globe. And so we have 3 volumes that's available on all of the streaming platforms. I also serve as a musical worship director at a church here in San Diego called Ethnos Community Church.
So I think that one of the big questions, you say you work at a church. How did you come to know Jesus?
How did I come to know Jesus? Great question, David. I came to faith in Jesus Christ at the age of 13. It was Christmas Eve, in fact. We were in my family's apartment there in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And my mom and I were sitting there just having a conversation. It was a difficult time for us. We had a Christmas tree, no gifts under the tree. The power had just been shut off in the home because we couldn't afford to pay the bill, and we had an eviction notice. And I remember just kind of feeling down and sad. And my mom and I were engaging in conversation, and I'd gone to church all my life, but that was the day that I felt compelled to formalize my faith in Jesus Christ.
Awesome. I think I was around the same age too, actually, which is quite cool. So far, the 2020 hasn't been a great year. They haven't been roaring compared to the 1920s. If you had to come up with a different adjective to describe the decade so far, what would it be?
Ooh, Rad, that's a good question. I think the word would be unprecedented. Unprecedented. From USA's 2016 election to the most current, to Brexit. I mean, 2 impeachments here in my country: Haiti, earthquake, terrorist attacks, Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and now we're in a pandemic. So it's been unprecedented. It's been a heck of a decade.
So as you know, tonight's topic is about justice, right? So we kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about your experiences on injustice and unfairness. You talk about like the Black Lives Matter, just different things, in your personal experience, what are some things you can share about whether or not you've gone through things similar?
Yeah, I would say, David, I would say as an African-American, living here in the United States, I think it's difficult to escape injustice because of deeply ingrained racist thinking, practices, actions, which I think are unfortunately embedded in the core foundations of American society. And so, yes, I've experienced unfairness and injustice. I've had a police pull a gun out on me for no logical reason. I've been followed in stores with people assuming I'm going to steal something. But there's one story that comes to mind for me. I remember leaving home for college, and I was living in Birmingham, Alabama, and made the drive down to the Birmingham Alabama, not to be mistaken for the other Birmingham. But I remember making the drive down to the University of Mobile in Alabama, and my mom was in the passenger seat. I was a driver, and we were about maybe halfway, and I got pulled over by a police officer, and the police told me that he had pulled me over because the tint on my windows were too dark. And just to be clear, the tint on the window came from the factory. It was factory tint. But that didn't stop the officer from making me get out of the car, climb into the back seat of the car, and then attempt to scrape off with my fingers the tint from the windows, the factory tint. And so his threat was that if I'd either have to do that or he would take the car away, have it towed. And so eventually he allowed me to leave. What's unfortunate is that that's not always the case for many Black men and women in the United States. Some don't get to leave. And so this happened right outside of Montgomery, Alabama, which it was known at one point as the slave trade capital of the United States. So I've seen and I've experienced an unfair share of injustice.
Mm-hmm. So sort of what was your, let's say response, from it? Like, would you say like your response, but also like, what does the Bible talk about, injustice and how we should respond to these things?
Yeah, I would say my personal response anytime, it depends on the day, of course, but it makes me angry. At some point I don't want to say you get used to it, but it is a common thing that happens so much with African Americans that you grow to expect that, unfortunately, but it makes me angry. And so my faith has played an important part in understanding how God sees injustice, and that kind of informs how I respond and react in life. I mean, I've found in the Bible that God is a God of justice and love and mercy. Jesus himself embodied justice. One passage that comes to mind for me is this moment where Jesus makes this profound public proclamation. Jesus stands up and says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. The Lord God is upon me because God has anointed me, has touched my life to bring good news to the afflicted. God has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners." These were the words of Jesus. And so I believe it breaks the heart of God when people are treated unfairly, because I think all humans were created in God's image and likeness. And so there are so many examples of in the Bible, where Jesus comes to the rescue of those who have been outcast and marginalized. And so how it informs my faith, I think I tend to try to live my life on purpose. My faith in Jesus Christ has given me purpose, and a part of my purpose is to use the tools that God has given me, singing, speaking, creating music, to inspire, to uplift, to encourage people, and to challenge people to live out God's greatness in their lives. Because I believe my faith assures me that there's a song and a scripture that says, "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." And so my faith in God gives me hope and assurance to know that I can be a vessel used by God to be effective and affecting positive change in this broken world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. So on top of what you said and having a purpose, how would you kind of like advise, the church and just us as human beings on kind of treating everyone kind of, how Jesus would treat them? Is there like through living your life and the things that you do, how would you say that having this relationship with Jesus changes the way that you see these things and really works in the core?
Yeah, thanks, Brad, for that question. And speaking to the Christian church, my encouragement to church leaders would be to not respond in denial when people share their stories of injustice, to listen to learn, and not to be so fast, not to move so quickly to talk about unity and healing. I mean, conciliation is the end goal, but I believe we can't have that without atonement. And so there's no atonement without confession of wrongdoing. And I think this has been difficult, especially for those of dominant culture here in mainstream Christianity. I believe, honestly, 2020 and 2021 is a wake-up call for many in the church. And I'm starting to see people move, church leaders move towards acknowledging that their very own structures and thinking and theology sometimes has kind of contributed to the systemic injustice and oppression. So my encouragement to church leaders and to people is just to listen, to learn, to confess, and to have a time where we're just honest with one another and with ourselves, and to grow from there. But to follow the principles, the teachings and the principles of Jesus Christ, where Jesus, the greatest call he gave to Christians was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And we can't love our neighbors if we don't know our neighbors. We have to sit, listen, and learn from our neighbors.
I think this is a topic where it's quite big and we can kind of chat on it for ages and a long time. Personally, in Hong Kong, there's another type of political injustice is another one as well. So definitely something that we can all relate to. But I know you'll be joining us on the Welcome Desk Zoom afterwards. So if people do want to have a chat with you more, or I might go and have a chat with you more about this topic as well. But you will be joining us there, will you, right? Yeah?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, okay. Just checking. But thank you for joining us. We hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining all the way from the US as well. And we hope to see you there.
You're welcome. Thank you, David and Rad, for having me.
Now I'm gonna pass the time over to Rad to read this passage for us for tonight before we give the time over to Robin.
Yeah, so the passage is Luke 5, 1-11, which you'll see on the screen right now. So one day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats, left there by fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of the fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him.
Thank you for that, Rad. And with that, we're going to hand over the time to you, Robin, on talking about the topic of justice.
Great. Thanks very much indeed, David and Rad and Eric as well. It's really nice to be with you. Thanks for coming. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you've been before, welcome back. It's great to have you. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. Now, in my experience, what Leo Tolstoy, the Russian novelist, said is true. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. Think, for example, about the issue of justice that we're looking at this evening. It's a massive issue right now, isn't it? I don't want to underestimate that. It's a huge issue politically, racially, the issue of sexuality, all of that stuff. I haven't got time to explore all of those things. But what I do see is that everyone wants others to face justice. So we have this deep sense of when things are wrong or unfair, when we see other people doing things wrong, we want them to face justice. But when it comes to us, we're much more kind of, well, no, I don't need justice. And so what happens is we live in a world that demands forgiveness, but it has no way of delivering it. And the great news I've got for you this evening is that Jesus does. That Jesus is the one who can deal with the issue of justice, and Jesus is the one who can give us for we get wrong. And so Jesus is the one who changes the world, and he does it by changing one person at a time. And my prayer is that he will change you as he has changed me, as he changed Simon Peter in that encounter with Jesus that Rad's just read for us. Each evening, we're looking at an encounter that Jesus has with somebody in Luke's gospel. And to help us think about the encounter Jesus has with Simon Peter, I want to talk to you about Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. You may have seen it. You will have certainly seen it on the news a couple of years ago. Do you remember when that terrible fire started? When so much of that amazing building was destroyed. But during its 1,000-year history, one of the biggest way people got interested in Notre Dame wasn't through visiting it, but through a book. Back in 1831, Victor Hugo, who also wrote Les Miserables, wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame. If you've read the book, you've seen the film. And it tells a story of the beautiful Esmeralda. And she's rescued by this deformed Quasimodo. And having rescued her by swinging down the bell rope of Notre Dame, this hunchback Quasimodo carries Esmeralda off to the cathedral for protection. And there's a particularly moving scene in the cathedral tower. Quasimodo begins to cry, and Esmeralda asks him, what's up? And he says, do you know, I never knew how ugly I was until I saw how beautiful you are. I never knew how ugly I was until I saw how beautiful you are. And that's what's going on in this Bible passage we're looking at tonight. Not with Quasimodo and Esmeralda, but with Simon Peter and with Jesus. Now, let me be clear, this wasn't a kind of physical ugliness we're talking about here. It's really a spiritual and inside ugliness. And this encounter that Simon Peter has with Jesus changed his life forever. And it's an encounter which can change your life as well. Now, the first thing I want us to see here is the beauty of Jesus, the beauty of Jesus. Jesus is up north in Galilee, and he's preaching by Lake Galilee. And so many people were crowding around to hear him that he has to use these fishing boats for a pulpit. Now, it shouldn't surprise us that so many people wanted to hear Jesus, because he's got good news for us. That's what we've been hearing over the last week at these events, the fantastic news that Jesus has for us. Eric has mentioned it tonight, the news of freedom, the news of forgiveness that only he can bring. Well, one of these boats belonged to Simon, who we know better as Peter. This is the Peter who later denied Jesus. Do you remember all the kind of cock crowing 3 times stuff? This Peter. And yet that Peter was wonderfully restored and became a key leader in the early church. And it's to Simon Peter that Jesus speaks his first recorded words to an individual in Luke's gospel. Jesus says, "Put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch." I wonder if you've seen the irony here. Jesus is a carpenter by trade. His dad was a carpenter, he was a carpenter, and here he is, a carpenter telling a fisherman how to do his job. Well, not surprisingly, Simon's pretty unconvinced. He thinks Jesus should stick to making tables rather than try fishing. After all, the best time to catch fish was at night, and last night they'd caught nothing. But there's something about this Jesus that makes Simon do what he says, and so they let down their nets. And what happens next is extraordinary. That they land the biggest catch of their lives, so large that their nets were breaking, and they filled both boats, so large that both boats begin to sink. One of them picked at 2 fishing boats, so full of fish, they're beginning to sink in the very place where last night they hadn't caught anything. Well, Simon Peter knows his fishing, and he knows what this means. It means that Jesus is no ordinary preacher, but that he is the Lord, the ruler of heaven and earth. I wonder if you've realized who Jesus is. You see, you'll never understand Christianity until you do. Jesus is the one who made the seas and the fish. And so he's the one who can control what he's created. I'd love you to consider that more. And 2 really good ways of doing that. One is to read one of the Gospels. This is Luke's Gospel that we've been looking at each evening. It's called Uncover. It's a really good resource to help you read the Gospel on your own or with a friend and make sense of who this Jesus is. The other thing is a course that the Christian Union are running called Experience. It's a chance to get together with others and look at the Bible and discover and to question who Jesus is. Now, we'll come back to Peter's reaction a bit later on, but for now, just stop and marvel at the beauty of Jesus Christ, the brilliance of Jesus. Look at the one who created all things, and therefore the one who controls all things, the one at whose command even the fish of the sea come running. Well, I guess fish don't run, they swim, but anyway, you get the idea. Now, I guess for many of us, this is a well-known story. Many of us have heard it since we were in Sunday school. For others, it might be the very, very first time you've heard of this. But whichever it is, don't miss this staggering beauty and brilliance of Jesus. Here is the Creator, now living in his creation, and he's commanding his creatures. He's commanding the fish. He's commanding Simon Peter. And it's when we see that we begin to see the ugliness of our own hearts. We've seen the beauty of Jesus. Now I want us to think about the ugliness of our hearts. Now, if you were Simon Peter, what would you do at this point? I know what I would do. I would rush off to the market. I would sell the fish. I'd make a killing. But that's not what he does. No, we're told that when Simon Peter saw this, he falls at Jesus' knees and says, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." Can you picture the scene? Simon Peter, this grown man, probably strong, big, kneeling down, probably on top of freshly caught fish. And he's saying, "Jesus, get out of here, because you're special and I'm sinful. You're beautiful and I'm ugly on the inside." Now, I think lots of people struggle with this Bible word sin or sinner. I mean, surely they're just like the really, really bad people, right? I mean, the people who make the front page of the tabloids. You know, they're the people who need to be brought to justice for their social media abuse or their horrific murders or their sexual exploitation. But, you know, here's the surprise. The first person who is called sinful in Luke's gospel is just this ordinary fisherman, Simon Peter. He's not a spectacular sinner like some of the people we read about in Luke. In a couple of chapters' time, we meet a guy called Levi, and he is a massive tax fraudster. Simon's not like that. A bit later on, we meet a woman who's a prostitute. And actually, it's not so much the prostitutes who are in the frame, but it's the people who use and exploit the prostitutes. Simon's not like that. Now, he's just an ordinary fisherman, an ordinary guy. with an ordinary job. I guess like many of us, just ordinary people. But faced with the beauty of Christ, he sees the ugliness of his own sin. I never knew how ugly I was until I saw how beautiful you are. Now, I think lots of people are uneasy with this idea of thinking about ourselves as sinful. You know, we're kind of worried it's going to kind of produce a kind of morbid introspection. But do realize that the way that Peter realizes this is not by looking at himself, but by looking at Jesus, by seeing how brilliant he is. Now, I realize this is massively countercultural. Our culture assumes that we are basically good, doesn't it? Sure, we get some things wrong, but basically we're pretty decent. And all this talk of sin, well, it's kind of dangerous and it's kind of damaging to our self-esteem. And if we ever do feel guilt, which of course we do because we get things wrong, we just transfer that guilt to other people. That's one of the reasons I think why we live in such an angry culture. Now, please don't mishear me. There are victims, people who have been very badly wronged. And that is a terrible thing. And there is a need for justice. But even as we recognize that, we need to own our own sin. You see, my problem is I'm so good at seeing what's wrong in other people, and I'm not so good at seeing what's wrong in me. I've got all sorts of ideas about how to change the world, whereas actually I've got to begin with changing me. Now, at this stage, I think what we normally do is we compare ourselves to other people. Like, well, you know, I'm not as bad as her. I'm not as bad as him. But think of it like this. Imagine you are standing on the top of Mount Everest. I don't know if anyone's climbed Everest here. I'd love to do that one day. Imagine you're at the top of Everest and somehow you could see someone else at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. And you're feeling so much superior because you're so much higher. In fact, you're 19,884 meters higher, to be precise. And then someone says to us both, touch the stars. Well, you might be on top of Mount Everest. I might be at the bottom of Mariana Trench. But which of us can touch the stars? Neither of us. And that's what's going on here. Simon Peter, he sees the stars. He sees the beauty of Jesus. And instead of comparing himself to others, he realizes that he can't touch the stars any more than anyone else can. He realizes how far he is away and how sinful he is. So he doesn't look down on others and say, well, I'm not like him. No, he looks up at Christ and says, I'm not like him. So, do you know, this is how you begin the Christian life. And this is how you carry on the Christian life, by recognizing that we are what the Bible calls sinful, that we are spiritually ugly on the inside, that we've not loved God as we ought, we've not loved each other as we ought. And actually, Jesus should have nothing to do with us. So what does Jesus do? Does he say, come on, Simon, you know, you're not that bad, but, you know, it's all right? No. Or does he say the opposite? Simon, you are right. You are a sinful man. I'm out of here. No. And so we come back again to the beauty of Christ. Jesus says to him, don't be afraid. And here's where we see the beauty of Jesus the most. You see, Jesus has come to call sinners to follow him. Sinners like Simon Peter, sinners like me, and sinners like you. And he's come to do more than that. He's come to die for sinners so that sinners like us can draw near to God and not be cut off from him. You see, the bad news is that we deserve God's justice for the things that we have thought and said and done wrong. And if nothing changes, that we will be condemned for those things. But the wonderful, wonderful news is that on the cross, God's perfect justice and God's perfect mercy meet in the most extraordinary way. You see, on the cross, God is a God of justice. He punishes wrongdoing. And actually, it'd be very wrong, wouldn't it, if God didn't do that? What kind of God would it be if he just said, oh, well, never mind about all that wrong stuff in the world. Let's just kind of ignore it. That wouldn't be a God worth worshipping. No, God is a God of justice. He must punish wrongdoing. But wonderfully, he's also a God of mercy, that he punishes that wrongdoing in Jesus Christ, his only Son. And that's something that Simon Peter begins to grasp here. And it's something that totally changed his life. You might know that Jesus ends his time on earth as he kind of begins it here with a miraculous catch of fish on Lake Galilee involving Simon Peter. Luke doesn't record that, but one of the other Gospels, John, records it at the end of his Gospel. And what does Peter do that time after another miraculous catch of fish? When he sees the risen Jesus on the shore of Lake Galilee, he doesn't run from him. He doesn't say, go away from me. No, he runs to him. You see, Peter's still sinful. He's proved that only a few days earlier when he denied Jesus, not once, not twice, but 3 times. But now he knows the heart of Jesus for sinners. I think sometimes people have this view of Jesus and they think that his kind of posture is basically a finger pointing, accusatory, or wagging, sort of condemning. But actually the posture of Jesus Christ is not that. It is open arms. It is welcome. It is come. I wonder if you know that. I wonder if you've heard Jesus say to you, don't be afraid. I wonder if you've heard him say to you, come. Come with all your mess and all your baggage and all your rubbish. Come to me. I love you. I've died for that. And I can forgive you. I wonder if you've felt his open arms and run into them. That's what a Christian is. Not somebody who is trying to keep the rules, hoping Jesus doesn't kind of wag his finger at you, but somebody who knows they haven't kept the rules and so comes running to Jesus for forgiveness. Well, the Bible says that there are 3 very simple things we can do to do that. It's as simple as A, B, C. So we need to admit, we need to believe, and we need to come. So first of all, we need to admit. We need to admit that we've got stuff wrong. That actually, however nice we might look on the outside, on the inside, our hearts are not right. That we are spiritually ugly. Or to use the Bible's language, we are sinful. We need to admit that. So many people won't do that. That they're proud, or they compare themselves to others and they, well, I'm not that bad. But no, we need to admit our sin. Then B, we need to believe. We need to believe that Jesus died for people like us. That on the cross, God's justice and God's mercy meet. And so that I can know full justice and perfect mercy as my wrongdoing is dealt with, but taken by Jesus Christ in my place. And then C, I need to come. I need to come to Jesus. I need to run into his open arms and to know his love and his embrace. Now, the Bible would say if you've not yet done that, you're not yet a Christian. No matter what you do, whether you go to church every Sunday, whether you've been baptized or confirmed, if you haven't admitted your sin and believed that Jesus died for it and come to him for forgiveness, you're not yet a Christian. And my greatest longing is that you would come and take those 3 simple steps. You can do it tonight on your own, in your bedroom, as you come to God and say, God, I admit that I'm a sinner. I believe that Jesus died for me, and now I want to come to him. You can do it with a friend. Why not speak to a friend who you know is a Christian and say, hey, look, I'd love to take this step. Can you help me do it? I'm not quite sure. Help me to do it. But that is my great longing for you. Everyone wants to change the world, but no one thinks about changing himself. We do need justice, of course we do. But the actual way of changing the world is not through changing systems. They're always going to be imperfect. It's by changing people. Not on the outside, because that doesn't actually change anyone, but changing them on the inside. And only Jesus Christ can do that. Thanks so much for listening. Do stick around if you want to ask some questions about that.
Thank you so much, Robin. I definitely fall short of comparing myself, but yeah, just hearing about the love of the Father is amazing. We'll see Robin after in the Zoom as well. So do come along if you have any questions for him. We just wanted to mention some events that we have going on in the next couple of weeks. So we have events happening at 6 p.m. on Wednesday and Friday of which there's free pizza. So do come along for that. Free food is always great. And then at 2 p.m. we have on 2 p.m. on Tuesday and Thursday, we have some more talks. So do come along to just find out more about Jesus. And then we have an experience course as well that will be running for 4 weeks starting the 5th of March. This will be a chance to find out more about how some students at Surrey have experienced Jesus and looking more at encounters and experiences Jesus has had in the Bible. It's also an opportunity to ask questions and looking at any aspects of Christianity and Jesus. It'll be online, and the website that was just posted is where you can find out some more information. And then as well, there is a connect form that you can fill in if you want to know more about the CU and just connect with us in general.
Yeah, Robin also mentioned there's a book called The Uncover Luke, which is also useful in guiding you to read the gospel. There's some really good discussion questions in there, and the online version of it is on our website, so you can check it out. If you want to read it with your friend, you can, that brought you, or if you want to read it with someone in the CU, people in the CU would be really happy to read it with you. So just contact us on our socials if you want to do that. After this Zoom, we're going to have our welcome desk, as we mentioned a couple times, where you can talk to a CU member or the speaker tonight, Robin, or Eric as well, who was our interviewee tonight. The link will be in the chat, which Rad will send. If you're in the Zoom webinar, you can click the link right there. If you're joining us on YouTube, just DM the Instagram at Surrey CU for that, and someone will send you the link through that. Yeah, last but not least, do follow our social media on Instagram and Facebook at Surrey CU to stay up to date with what's going on. And that should be it. Is there anything to add, Rad?
No, they were good.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us. Hope to see you at our other events. Have an amazing week ahead and good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.